Summary. Previous actions are explained, but a new problem arises. Chapter 7 Explanations. Hunter grinned at his teeth, eyes flitting over the water and garbage islands that surrounded him. There were no spears at all. Not even a rebar he could sharpen into a usable weapon. He took the dulled and useless metal stick off his back, studying it. It was bent at an odd angle, and the flat top of it had been crushed, probably on account of a heavy lizard pushing down on it. He sighed as he dropped the object on the ground. It wasn't even salvageable. Looking down into the dirty, murky depths below, he could see a spear lodged deep in the ground. But he did not feel like going for a dive in the disgusting water. Just the thought of it made him shudder in disgust. Even if I do find a spear, the stupid worms are just going to swipe it out of my paws. He glared at the closest worm, which had its head underneath the water and seemed to be sucking matter from the water, or something. It seemed to sense Hunter was looking at him, as it turned to him and stared back with its dumb, blank eyes. After a moment, it turned away, having lost interest in the impromptu staring contest and instead opting to stick its head back underwater. Hunter scoffed in disgust and turned away, deciding to backtrack towards the shelter. He had been out long enough. The rain could arrive at any moment, and he had to get back before it started falling. He winced in pain as he walked, still feeling an ache in his limbs and a pounding pain in his head, and had to suppress his urge to cough. His illness was progressing very slowly but surely. He had even started zoning out, feeling detached from his own body, something Survivor had no doubt noticed. The excuse to go look for spears was a really bad lie, even he could admit that. He groaned in frustration. No matter how much Hunter dreaded it, he might have to think about telling Survivor of his condition. Kicking a piece of rubble as he walked, he glanced forward. He was close now, just through this pipe, and he'd be one room before the shelter. Suddenly, his eyes caught something metal glinting off the last remnants of sunlight before the rain. Could it be? Hunter walked closer and yanked the piece of rebar out of the ground triumphantly, but his enthusiasm quickly faded when he saw the rough shape his improvised weapon was in. Quite like the piece of metal he had just discarded, the rebar was dulled and had only managed to stay lodged in the ground due to having been supported by the mounds of trash surrounding it. Hunter sighed and picked up the closest rock on the ground. At least sharpening it is easy work, he thought as he sat down and got to work. The clang of metal on metal was deafening but satisfying, as it always was. Hunter had good technique from experience, and in only a few short moments, he had turned the rebar into a decent spear. He hummed in satisfaction and twirled the spear around in his paw for a moment. It was far from his best work, but it would certainly do in a pinch. Hunter flinched violently as a nearby scream pierced the air, short and terrified. He couldn't hear the word that was said, but he definitely recognized the voice. Survivor. He's in danger. With a snarl, Hunter got to his feet and turned towards the pipe, just in time to see a cyan lizard crawl out of the pipe. Upon locking eyes with Hunter, the lizard hissed and shook its tail, preparing to leap. No time for this. Hunter growled and hurled the rubble at the lizard. It bounced off its nose as it screeched in surprise and flipped over. He took the opportunity to charge the lizard, running around to its side and stabbing the recently sharpened spear into the flesh. The lizard shrieked and flailed uselessly as Hunter pushed the spear as deep as he could. The lizard whined and thrashed, trying to get off the spear. Hunter grunted and, with tremendous effort, used the spear to push the lizard onto its side. The lizard squirmed as Hunter pulled the spear out and backed off. It tried lunging for him, but it stumbled and lost its balance. It was slowed down to a pathetic crawl, and the lizard hissed weakly and tried to leap. Its jump was completely off, and it missed Hunter by almost a meter. He crouched down into a combat stance, raising the spear threateningly at the lizard, snarling and showing his teeth. The lizard decided it had had enough and turned around to slowly crawl to its den. Hunter huffed and turned around, quickly crawling through the pipe leading towards the shelter. If something happens to him, it's all your fault. He climbed up the pipe to the tight tunnels, crawling through quickly and pushing off the walls to travel quicker. Splitting up, in this dangerous region? What the hell were you thinking? Hunter took a deep breath to prepare himself before jumping out of the tunnel and raising his spear. He scanned the room quickly, spotting Survivor. He was on his feet, turned away from Hunter, and in front of him was a scavenger. Its eyes were wide, and its stance was fearful and partly aggressive as it reached for the spears on its back. Hunter raised his own spear in warning, the tip still covered in lizard blood. The scavenger pulled the spear fully off its back, pulling back its arm. Survivor threw himself to the ground, curling up with a high whine of fear. Hunter felt burning rage run through his veins at the noise his fellow slugcat friend was making. Kill him before he kills you both. He won't hesitate, and neither should you. Hunter snarled and hissed, a last warning for the scavenger to drop their spear. The scavenger seemed to stand still for a moment, seeming to be weighing its options. Suddenly, Survivor screamed, loud and terrified, as he covered his head protectively. "No! Please don't!" The scavenger startled and moved to throw its spear. "Who's he aiming for? Who cares? Stop him!" The scavenger was fast on the draw, but Hunter was still faster. The spear flew through the air and, with a loud asterisk thunk, embedded itself in the scavenger's head. The spear got lodged right between the creature's eyes, frozen in fear and panic. The scavenger's body immediately went limp and was pinned to the wall, dropping its own spear on the ground. He took a moment to catch his breath before stepping forward and pulling the spear loose, watching the corpse collapse to the ground in a heap. Fucking scavengers, too paranoid for their own good. He suppressed the urge to keep stabbing the corpse in anger, instead focusing on trying to calm his anger. Looking down at the spear, it was covered in even more blood now and probably needed to be sharpened once more. But that could wait, he needed to help his friend. Hunter glanced back at Survivor, who had uncovered his head and opened his eyes, staring at the corpse. Hunter felt the boiling rage subside as he saw the fear in the white slugcat's wide eyes, his body slightly trembling as he stared at Hunter, flinching slightly when he noticed Hunter staring back. "He's scared of you." Hunter frowned and took a deep breath, trying to calm down further. "Are you all right?" he asked as softly as he could. Survivor didn't respond for a long moment. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Hunter added, and Survivor finally responded, shaking his head slowly. Before anything else could be said, the ground rumbled and shook. Hunter swore under his breath and walked forward, wasting no time in scooping Survivor into his arms, his heart aching slightly at the way he tensed up in fear. He jumped into the tunnels before stopping abruptly. He still didn't know where the shelter was. "Where are we going, left or right?" he asked with urgency in his tone. When Survivor didn't respond, he tried again. "Which way is the shelter, Survivor? Please." The white slugcat startled slightly at hearing his name, thinking for a moment before shakily responding. "It's left. To the left." Hunter grunted an affirmative and kept crawling, quickly spotting the shelter pipe and throwing Survivor inside. Quickly following inside when he could hear the first raindrops start falling. The shelter was nothing special, not unlike the other ones they had stayed in. Survivor shakily crawled into a corner and curled up in a fetal position, still trembling. Hunter carefully stepped closer, noticing the way Survivor tensed up and closed his eyes as he approached. He stopped a few steps away, giving Survivor some space, before sitting down next to him. He sighed in relief as he sat, finally able to rest his aching body. He coughed a few times into his fist before closing his eyes temporarily to try to dull the incessant migraine that kept pounding away at his head. A few minutes later, Hunter decided to sharpen the well-used spear. He pulled it off his back, taking a moment to lick the blood from the tip, once he made sure Survivor wasn't looking, before picking up a rock and getting to work. He worked for a few minutes in complete silence, making sure the spear was sharp enough to be a lethal weapon yet again. Once he was satisfied, he placed the spear on the floor next to him, out of Survivor's view. Speaking of the white slugcat, he seemed to have calmed down, not trembling as much as before and not completely frozen in shock and fear. After a moment, Survivor seemed to sense he was getting stared at and spoke slowly and carefully. "That scavenger, you killed them." He was obviously trying his best to keep his composure, but Hunter could hear his voice cracking and how close he was to breaking down completely. Hunter sighed, glancing over at him. His eyes were still closed, and he was rocking back and forth on the floor. "You did this to him with your reckless violence." He turned away and opted to stare at the shelter's ceiling instead. Yeah, I did. He coughed a couple times, tasting blood in his mouth but choosing to ignore it. But he would have killed us otherwise. His roommate suddenly snapped his head towards him, looking both angry and sad at the same time. He was friendly. Hunter turned to look at Survivor, shocked at the sudden anger in his voice. Survivor sniffled, looking down at the shelter floor. He just got scared. How naive. Hunter thought, his frustration building as he scoffed at Survivor's words. Once he pulled that spear off his back, it was him or us. The white slugcat looked up at him again, looking shocked at Hunter's words. He pointed towards Survivor, then to himself. I chose us. Survivor got to his feet quickly, suddenly looking very angry. The scavengers saw you as a threat. He pointed towards Hunter, who growled in response. If you had dropped your spear, they would have seen us both as friends. Hunter huffed, coughed a few times, and stood up, straightening to his full height and staring Survivor in the eye menacingly. To the other slugcat's credit, he didn't so much as flinch. They would have speared me through my fucking head, then stabbed you to death with zero hesitation. What makes you so sure he'd react like that? Hunter's face twisted. Because that's how they've always treated me, he snarled, his voice loud and ugly, as he bared his fangs. Survivor's anger quickly dissipated, and he fell silent. Any words he wanted to say died in his throat. He was looking at Hunter with concern, and Hunter had no idea why until he felt hot tears running down his face. Shit. Hunter turned around, wiping his eyes with the back of his paw. He turned back towards the other slugcat, who still seemed concerned at Hunter's sudden outburst of emotion. Just tell him, he'll understand. Hunter stayed quiet for a moment longer before finally speaking, his voice cracked and broken from the coughing and screaming throughout the cycle. I've had many, violent experiences with scavengers throughout my cycles. Believe it or not, their tribes actually spread out further beyond just these regions. He coughed again to try to clear his throat, backing up against a wall and sliding down to take a seat on the shelter floor. After a moment's hesitation, Survivor sat down next to him. Back where I come from, they were all over the place, just like this region. He stopped for a moment. Feeling the scar on his eye itch, he reached up and scratched at it carefully. He glanced over at Survivor, who was staring intently at him, patiently waiting for him to continue. I know from experience that when the first spear is aimed, there's no way to stop the imminent fight to death. Hunter pointed to the scar on his eye, mirthlessly laughing before continuing. This came from my first meeting with a scavenger. They were even more paranoid and scared than the one above, and when they had their spear drawn and ready, I dropped mine. In response, he threw his spear right at my head. I only managed to survive thanks to my fast reflexes. Hunter chuckled again, leaning his head back and staring up at the ceiling. If he really focused, Hunter could still feel the warm blood rush down his face and into his eye as the scavenger hissed and pulled out another spear. The point is, the reason I killed the scavenger is because I've seen how ruthless they can be when cornered and scared. If they threw the spear at me, I could have dodged it, maybe. But what if they stayed aggressive or even panicked more because they missed their throw? He turned to Survivor, smiling sadly. What if they had hurt you? Survivor's eyes widened as he looked at Hunter in shock. Hunter looked away, opting to once again look at the floor. I couldn't take the risk. I'm sorry, Survivor. He closed his eyes, a couple more tears slipping through and smattering quietly on the floor. I'm so sorry. After a few moments of complete silence, Hunter heard a slight shifting and felt a pair of arms embrace him. If the scavenger had gotten the opportunity to throw, they probably would have killed you, correct? Hunter nodded against Survivor and purred as he gently started petting the fur on his back. I don't want to see you get hurt either. He took a deep breath, tightening his hold on the red slugcat. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I forgive you, Hunter. Hunter instinctively made a happy chirp before blushing in slight embarrassment. The embarrassment quickly faded when Survivor chirped back, snuggling into his fur. He smiled and got comfortable, closing his eyes and preparing to hibernate. Survivor was stunned by Hunter's story. He felt terrible that he hadn't considered Hunter's side of things. He had no doubt heard Survivor scream, came rushing to see what was wrong, and immediately saw a scavenger pulling a spear out while Survivor panicked on the ground. In retrospect, it wasn't all that surprising that he decided to act violently to protect himself and, by extension, Survivor. He tried to imagine what could have happened if Hunter hadn't thrown that spear, if he would have dropped the weapon or tried to defuse the violent situation. But when he imagined that going south and Hunter's limp corpse lying on the ground in front of him, a spear sticking out of his eye, he felt nauseous. Considering the situation at hand, Survivor was happy that the scavenger had died, as terrible as thinking that felt. Nevertheless, the cycles continue, and the scavenger would wake back up again, no worse for wear after their hibernation was done. Speaking of which, he could feel Hunter's breathing slow down and the tension in his body leave. It was time to sleep. He closed his eyes and relaxed, resting his head in the crook of Hunter's neck. Just as he was about to let sleep claim him, he was wrenched back to consciousness by loud and painful-sounding coughing. Hunter got out of Survivor's embrace, hunching over on his hands and knees as he coughed into the floor. Survivor quickly got on all fours, crawling up next to Hunter and putting a paw on his shoulder in an attempt to comfort him through the painful coughing fit. His eyes were unseeing, wide, and pained as he hacked into the floor. After a moment, Hunter's coughing slowed down before ceasing completely. Survivor shook his shoulder lightly and gasped when the other slugcat turned to look at him. His eyes were unfocused and filled with fear and pain. There was a thin trail of blood running down his chin. Glancing down, Survivor noticed small spots of blood on the floor where Hunter had kneeled. Hunter tried to take a deep breath, wheezing at the intake and coughing again a few times as he tried to breathe out. Not knowing what else to do, Survivor simply threw his arms around Hunter and hugged him close. He tensed at the sudden contact before squeezing back and nuzzling into the fur on his neck. Survivor started rubbing comforting circles into his back, hearing his friend's pain wheezing slowly return to something akin to regular breaths. After making sure Hunter had calmed down, he gently backed out of the hug. Hunter whined lowly as Survivor backed off, but calmed down when Survivor curled into him from behind and moved him into a more comfortable sleeping position. Once they were comfortable, Survivor curling around Hunter in a protective half-circle. He nestled into Hunter's neck and rumbled contently. Hunter responded with his own, rougher-sounding purr. After a while, Hunter's breathing evened out completely as he eventually softly snored. Survivor sighed with relief, curling in a bit closer to Hunter. That coughing fit. Hunter was coughing blood, and not just a small amount that could come from a scratched throat. Were they sick? With what? Was it curable? They would definitely be having a talk about this in the next cycle, but that could wait. With a soft smile, Survivor gave Hunter a lick behind the ear before closing his eyes and joining him in deep sleep.